Hey, Pete here for Studio Live today, and in this GarageBand iOS video, I'm going to be taking you through the mixing, the tracking, the mastering process of my new song called The Tree. So in about the next 20 minutes, I'm going to go through some of the concepts I used here. I'm not going to go through every track and every decision, but I'm going to give you some tips that I learned as I went along and how I actually completed the mixing process and got my end track. So let's go. Okay, so here we are in GarageBand looking at our track, and I'll take you through each of the tracks to start with, and then we'll go through some of the techniques that I use throughout. So first track here is a click track, and this is a click track I created because this song has mixed meter, which means that it's using multiple time signatures throughout. So we use 3/4, 4/4, and 5/4 in different sections. So just using the metronome wasn't going to work. We had to make our own. We'll talk about that in a moment. We have 3 piano tracks here. We've got 2 high and 1 low. It's basically really only 2 tracks, but the reason that we have the third track is that towards the end here, we actually split it out and put it on a second track, and I'll tell you why we did that in a little while as well. We have all of our vocals, and this is a do as I say, not as I do. Make sure that you label your vocals properly and label all your tracks properly, because you can see there my vocal naming is not particularly good. But basically what we've got here is 2 backing tracks here, so a left and a right backing track. We've got 2 of these intro tracks, which you'll hear in a moment. We've got the lead vocal track. We've got the other lead vocal, which is actually our harmony, our main harmony part. And then at the end here, we've got 3 other harmony parts that come in right at the end, and a blank track just for fun. We have 2 drum tracks, and these are split out because of the different time signatures that we have in the different sections. And again, I'll show you how they work in a moment. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 acoustic guitars, which are just layers of a similar guitar part. It just creates that nice, rich, full guitar sound if you've got multiple guitars. So we'll go through that in a moment. We have 3 electric guitars, so our 2 main electric guitars that go throughout, and our third guitar, which is our guitar solo down here. We have a bass guitar just using the standard 60s combo bass amp simulator. We've got a glockenspiel and an oboe, and you'll see that they line up with that guitar solo, so that gives you a hint as to what their function is. And we've got a couple of strings, so we've got some sustained strings and some pizzicato strings at the bottom here as well. So that is all of our tracks, and now let's go through and I'll show you what they all do, some of the mixing decisions I made, and how I came to the end result. And if you hang around till the end of the video, I'll actually play the full song that is now being completed and released. So if you want to just skip ahead and hear the song, feel free, go for it. If you want to hear all the inside secrets and tips of how I created it, hang around and we'll go through that now. Okay, so you'll notice that I'm using sections here. So if I tap the plus at the top there, here's all my sections. We've got a 2-bar section, which is just our little intro to make sure that we've got some space at the front. And then we've got 10, 16, 16, 10, 16, 16, 10, 10, 12, 10, 10, 12. The interesting thing about these is that that is how many bars they are in 4/4 time. As I mentioned before, some of our sections are in 5/4 and 3/4 time. So because our metronome doesn't support that, we've had to create our own click track at the top here. So if we zoom in on this one, I've just used some coffee shop percussion. And the trick here is that you just have to do a little bit of basic mathematics to work out how many bars you need in your section to create the number of bars you need. So for instance, I needed 8 bars of 5/4 time. So that's why this first section is 10 bars of 4/4 time. So yeah, it's a pretty basic mathematics there, but it's the way that we can get this to work. So if I play this click track in the metronome, you'll hear what I mean. So it sounds pretty confusing like that, and that's why I actually wrote this click track first, so that all of the sections had their own click track and own metronome, so that I could turn this off, and then when I came in to track my piano, my guitars, my vocals, it sounded like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. So that way I didn't have to listen to the metronome and get confused by where it was clicking on. And I did that all the way through for my different sections. And as I said, some of them were 4/4, some are 3/4, some are 5/4. You'll hear that as we go through. So our first instrument and what this track is kind of based around is our piano. So let's turn our 3 piano tracks on, and the piano at the start of the song sounds like this. So it's a very basic sort of piano sound. We've got the one track up here for high and one track for low. And that's something I do most of the time because it makes it easier to play and it also makes it easier to mix. What I've done in the mixing here is the right piano is panned sort of 50% right and the low piano is panned 50% to the left. So it kind of mirrors that stereo image of a piano. I like my low piano on my left and the high on the right. You can switch it around if you wanted to. That's the way I went for it. In terms of plugins and EQ, there's not much on here. I actually quite like the standard piano sound we get here in GarageBand, so I don't tend to play with it much, except for maybe a bit of volume, automation, or compression. But in this case, there's nothing on these pianos. Now, I mentioned before that I have 2 tracks here, and there's a reason why I did that. So let's go to the high piano here. I'm just going to solo this, and you'll hear that throughout, it's fairly sort of basic on the grid sort of pattern. So let's play this here. And because of that, what I actually did was used quantization. So if we come in here and look at quantization, it's got a 1/16 light swing quantization. And as I always say, if you want to know about quantization, check out the video linked below. But quantization will just line up your notes on the grid. However, this section of piano kind of has a bit more of a loose feel. So when I put it up here and it was quantized, it sounded quite terrible. So down here, I've actually made this track without quantization. If we go there, it's got none. And when we play this track, you'll hear why I needed to turn that off. So it's got that loose feel. If I quantize that, and I won't show you right now because we're short on time, but if I quantize that, it would go duh, 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 duh. It wouldn't have that nice loose feel to it. So that wouldn't have worked. So there's my piano tracks. And you can see I started with those with a lower volume. And as I went on, I actually increased the high piano because I really wanted that to cut through and create that treble at the top end. Let's move on and talk vocals now. So the vocals actually start with these 2 tracks here. So these at the very start of the song, and when you listen at the end, you'll hear these sort of kick in with the start of the song with a bit of this. Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, so what have I got on here? Well, I've got some pretty heavy plugins and EQ here. I've got some fairly hard compression going on there, so the threshold set down there, it's 2.6 to 1, it's pushing pretty hard. I've done some EQing here to drop some of the bass and add some of the treble, and I've done that the same across both. You can see here in terms of the panning, if we go to the top and go back out here, that one of these is panned hard left, and one is panned hard right. So we're opening up with a nice stereo sound of our vocals that sits behind our other instruments there. And you can see that that's just that 2 parts that are recorded on this track. The rest of the vocals are down below. So let's take those off now and we'll jump straight into our lead vocals. So our lead vocal comes in after the intro and after our 5/4 section and sounds a bit like this. Plant a tree that you won't see. And what you'll first probably notice there is there's a heap of bleed there. That was because I had my monitor speakers on in the background while I recorded this vocal. And because time was short, the vocal sounded good and it didn't really take away. It probably has muddied up the mix a little bit and I could have done better with that. But it's one of those things that if you do something like that and it still sounds okay, sometimes it's okay to just go with it. And because when you put it in the mix, it sounds like this. Plant a tree that you won't see. And you can see it doesn't really pop out as much. So let's look at what we've done on this lead vocal. So we go to our plugins and EQ. You can again see some pretty heavy compression and the threshold's down even further on this one. And our ratio is at 3.3 to 1. So we're really pushing the compressor even harder on this one than we did on the previous track. In terms of our EQ, we've only got a tiny little bit of a mid-range boost there. I like to boost between sort of 400 and 500 hertz on my voice. In hindsight, it might even be a little bit dark and muddy. Probably could have actually tamed the bass down a little bit on the vocal, but I'm just showing you what I finally went with my final mix. So you can see here the rest of them are pretty much the default lead vocals. I haven't played with a lot of those. We've got a little bit of enhanced tuning on there. Whoops, we've gone completely out of there. We'll show that. A little bit of, actually we've got quite a bit of enhanced tuning in the end on there, no shame in that. I've got some pretty hard compression and also quite a bit of, I've pressed the wrong button again, we've also got quite a bit of echo and delay that you'll hear. So I've used the echo and reverb master effects, and I've also got in here under the track reverb, we've got, yeah, quite a bit of reverb on there as well. And as always, if you want to learn all about EQ, plugins, compressors, reverb and echo, they're all very cool, and there's videos on all of those that you can check out and learn all about how to use those. But for now, we need to move on because we need to talk about some backing vocals. So my main backing vocal comes in a few little phrases there, but it's mostly here where it starts kicking with the lead vocal. So let's listen to that. Did you find a friend to play? Are your hopes and dreams all coming true? So again, you can hear it's just a complementary sort of vocal, and the difference in terms of what I actually did here with this one doesn't have the overdrive on there, so it's a little bit sort of a softer kind of tone in the voice. The EQ, I've actually dropped the bass and pushed the treble like I have with some of my other backing vocals, just to give it a little bit more air and not as much drive as the main vocal. And I haven't gone quite as crazy with the compressor here as well either. So that's what gives me the backing vocal sound that's not going to overtake the lead vocal. It's just going to give a little bit of support to it there. Okay, a little bit more on vocals. Finally, we've got these three down the bottom here, and these are our harmonies at the very end of the track. So if we just play from a section here. And in terms of how we've EQ'd and put the compression and everything else on here, they're very similar to our other backing vocals, so I won't go into a lot of detail on that. You can see I've just balanced out the levels here because I've sung a little bit louder and softer on some and wanted a little bit of a different mix for each of those. When we add those back in with the main vocals as well. Yes, I'll wait for you by the tree in the school. The tree. There you go, I missed my calling. Should have been an a cappella barbershop quartet, one-man barbershop quartet. Anyway, let's have a look at where our panning is on this. So you would have seen when we looked at it anyway where it's going. You can probably hear it. So we've got one panned hard right, one hand hard left, and one in the middle. So that gives us that balance at the end where you just sort of hear the different parts mixing with themselves, and our lead and backing vocal are right down the middle as well. So I've kind of used LCR panning, which just means left, center, right. So I've got nothing sort of in the middle sections, just to give it a really simple sort of feel that we've got you know, a 5-part harmony, but we've got 3 down the middle and those 2 complementary on the right. I could have pushed some out and done some fancy stuff there. Didn't feel like it at the time, so that's what we've ended up with. All right, let us move on from there and start looking at some drums. Okay, so let us have a look at these drums now. So you can see here that I've had to hand program all of these, especially in the 5/4 and the 3/4 sections, because we can't use any predefined loops or drummer because they're not going to work. So for what I did for the first drum was a very basic sort of 5/4 beat, which sounds like this. And you can see I was very brave there. I haven't actually even quantized that. Did I quantize? Yeah, I quantized the other track to an 8th note because that was my 4/4 beat. So let's go to that now and go to the other track and play this. This is again a very basic sort of 4/4 beat, and we'll play that now. So you can tell that I wasn't really a drummer ever. These are pretty simple sort of beats, but the song isn't really a sort of drum heavy song. So they're kind of the 2 main sections, to be honest. We've just used a pretty basic standard kit here. Haven't done a whole lot in the way of compression or any sort of EQing on the drums. I think the GarageBand drums sound pretty good. And as I said, this song's more about the guitars and the vocals and the piano. So the drums are really just there to be the engine room that follows through with that. What I did want to show you though is there's a couple of these 3/4 sections. So we do have a 3/4 beat here, which I'll play now. And that's a very basic beat again, and that goes with this part of the song. So again, we just wanted something that was going to drive the song through, sit under that guitar solo, and do its thing. So that's what we had there. Let us go and look at our acoustic guitars. So as I mentioned before, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 acoustic guitars. You'll notice that one of these is at the highest volume. So let's play just that one to start with, which is our main guitar. And you can see I didn't record it particularly well because the volume level there is a bit too low. But if we play that, and our other guitars you'll find are fairly similar. So we'll just go through each of these. Optimizing performance. Part 2, the optimizer returns. So there you go. We've got sort of the other layers of guitar sitting below this main guitar. And if we look at where we have these panned, we've got our main guitar right down the middle. We've got this one sort of 50% left, this one 50% right, and this one is sitting right in the middle as well, but with a lower volume. And the reason for that is that this last pair was actually recorded. So this one here is a microphone, and this one is direct as well. So I've put the direct recording in there, sorry, the direct acoustic in there to just have a little bit more attack. And you can hear that by itself it doesn't sound too great. But sitting underneath the other guitars just helps fill it out and hit those notes a little bit harder. In terms of what we've done with our guitars, we once again have some pretty heavy compression, especially on this guitar that was too quiet. So yeah, we've got 3.6 to 1 compression there, and the threshold quite far down. We've got a little bit of EQ on here, so we've boosted the bass and dropped some of the mid-range to reduce some of the mud, and added a bit of treble. So with the acoustic guitars, I wanted to make sure that they were a full sound, that they weren't tinny. And I wanted to make sure that we boosted up a little bit of that bass just to bring out the fullness in the bottom end of the guitar. So that's what we've done across most of the guitars, and there's some slight variations across each of these that you can see with different amounts of compression, but the overall was based on the nice room setting. So I tend to start with that. It sounds pretty good, and then I just make a few tweaks as I go along. So all 4 of those tracks just go most of the way through, and the acoustic guitar just kind of drives through the track, as you'll hear at the end when you hear the track. Let's move to electric now, if we unsolo those. And you can hear our 2 main electric guitars kick in right from the start and go pretty much most of the way through. So let's play those now. So what I've got here is I've got 2 different types of guitars, and I've actually used 2 different guitars for both of these. So what I'll do is we'll go to the section here where we're in 4/4 time, and I'll first play this one. So this is over on the left guitar here. You can see the panning, and this I used a Les Paul copy. It's an Epiphone Les Paul. Sorry, don't have a genuine Gibson, but it's a Les Paul guitar. It's through this sort of classic crunch sound, which is one of the presets in the Tone collection, which is very cool, and it sounds a bit like this. In terms of what I actually did with that one, there's not a lot in the way of effects that I've got on there. There's my EQ. What I've done is I've really pulled down the bass on this one because it was really muddy originally, and I wanted it to just sort of sit nicely across the top of the track. And if I go into my amp, I've not actually done a whole lot here in terms of the amp settings either. So I've just got the compressor pedal on there, and I haven't actually changed much from this blackface combo that's just got a little bit of reverb on there, doesn't have any tremolo, anything like that. It's pretty standard kind of guitar tone that I've gone with for that one. So let's have a look now at our second guitar, which is this one. And this one has a little bit more drive to it. So if we listen to what that sounds like. So this one's a little bit more of our lead guitar sound. If we put those together, you can hear that I've got sort of the bass on the left and the treble on the right. And again, I tend to do that a lot. Maybe I should have switched those around actually in hindsight, because I got my low piano on the left. Anyway, good tip to myself for next time. If we go into a section like this, you'll hear how they come together. And then when we go sort of to our ending part here, you'll hear the sort of different tone we get in the chorus sections. So you can hear that our Modern UK on the right is very much doing the lead kind of work, and our Tube King over on the left is doing a little bit more of the rhythm, just sort of controlling that throughout the track. We have one more electric guitar here, which is this lush delay. So what is that all about? Well, that is our guitar solo, which sounds a bit like this. Now, I really like that sound. I put the lush delay on, and then I said to myself, let's go even more nuts with the delay sound on this. So I've got the reverb down here in our master effects. If I go into my reverb, that's on the default. But if we go to our plugins and EQ, we've got the compressor, we've got tape delay, and we've got visual EQ. So there's delays and reverbs out the wazoo on this one, and that's what creates that very cool delay sound that we have there. Now, I'll show you the bass in a minute, but I wanted to show you these two instruments at the same time, because I mentioned before that they related to this guitar solo track. And that's because by itself, that guitar solo sounded a bit thin, especially in the context of the mix. So what I wanted to do was actually add some additional elements to this. So we have a glockenspiel first of all, which adds this. So by itself kind of just sounds a bit like a toy piano, but it kind of works with the solo there. And then we've also got an oboe in there, so listen to this. And what that basically does, it basically creates an octave effect. So instead of like using an octave pedal or an effect to create that octave sound with a guitar, I just wanted to put some other sounds in there that created some different sort of texture that was going to help that solo along. And when we listen to that solo part in the overall mix, it sounds like this. So I think those other two instruments just add a little bit of additional interest, I guess, to that. I didn't really add a whole lot in the way of EQ and any other effects to those instruments either. They're pretty stock standard. They've just got a little bit of reverb from memory. Yeah, some reverb on there and the exact same amount of reverb on that. So I was a little bit lazy with those tracks, but I think they sounded fine in the mix. Let's talk about my bass. My bass guitar skills are slightly better than my drumming, but not much. So the bass is a pretty basic sort of track. Let's listen to that. And I've done virtually nothing with the bass. And in fact, I've actually got reverb on the bass, which I normally don't recommend. So I probably did that by mistake. And again, bass and drums I have in my tracks, but it's probably not my specialty. So it's a very basic bass track that just kind of drives along, sits underneath everything, and helps the drums with that low end. So I basically trust the guitar amp sims that we have here in GarageBand and don't play with the bass an awful lot, especially with a song like this that I'm recording. That's something I should have said earlier. This song was to be recorded just in the month of February, so the reason that I sort of recorded and mixed it and didn't spend a lot of time on these mixing decisions was that I was pretty short on time as it was. So let's continue on. We've only got two instruments left here, and that is these strings. We'll unsolo that. So our first string is just some sustained strings that come in at the end of the track, which sound a bit like this. So very much a pad just to pad out that last section with all those additional vocals. And then we have a pizzicato string section here at the end. And again, barely audible in the mix, but I added that at the end just to have a little bit of additional texture and interest in that last section, which is what I hope it did. So there it is. As I said, we haven't been through every single mix decision that I made here, but you can see here that just using a lot of the default stuff here in GarageBand, using some echo and some reverb and some delay in there, looking at our compression settings, making sure our volume levels are right, and that's about it. That's really all I do at this point to get the mix to a point where it's going to be listenable and it's going to sound good and cohesive together. So as I mentioned before, there's all of the videos that I do my quick jams on, which show you how to do all of these things in terms of all of the different plugins that we have here in GarageBand. So take a look at those if you want to learn some of these techniques that I've used in this track. Okay, I mentioned mastering at the start, and I did that for a reason because I did do some very light mastering on this track, and I did that by the use of the FX track down here. Now, I've done a video all about how we can use this FX track, but basically we add the FX function, record some FX, delete them, and then we're left with this master track down here at the bottom. And if we go into here, you can see that we have the ability to EQ this track, and that's about it. But if we go into our EQ here, you can see that I've used this to do a couple of things. I've dropped the bass down here, so I've cut a little bit of the bass. What I was finding is that the bottom end of this song was overpowering, and that tends to happen with a lot of my mixes here in GarageBand. I tend to add a bit too much bottom end with some of the amp simulators on guitars and the bass amp simulators as well, and some of the virtual drums. So I've just done a sort of shelf down there at 100 Hertz, and that will just bring down the bass a little bit. So I'll play you this now and you'll hear the difference between having this EQ set and not. So this is it as I've EQ'd it.
Plant a tree that you won't see.
And now we'll turn that off.
That's what they always said to me, and it never meant as.
So depending where you're listening, it just tames it off. On headphones, it was sounding fine, especially on earbuds. And then I went and played it on some studio monitors, and it was just really rumbly. So just making that small move helped out. And what you'll notice over here as well is I've also very marginally put the volume up there. So it's by no means the ability to do limiting, which I would love to be able to do here, but you can then adjust your overall volume to give yourself a little bit more volume so that when you're exporting this mix, it's going to compete with other mixes. So in a future video, what I'm going to do is show you how we can actually export this as a WAV file, import it, and do a full mastering job by using all of our EQ and effects on one single stereo track. But for today, that's what I just wanted to show you, is that all I did was did a little bit of light EQ at the end there and then exported. And because GarageBand actually does some automatic limiting, which means that it will bring the volume up to a level at about minus 0.1 dB. And if you don't know about that, that's cool. But it basically just means it won't clip. And clipping is bad. Clipping means that it's going to go over into the red and sound horrible. So we don't want that, but we want enough volume out of our tracks to make it sound good. So that is it in terms of how I feel about this track after doing it. I think for something that I tracked and recorded, mixed, mastered, and then released completely from within GarageBand with no external plugins and no third-party apps on an iPhone 6s Plus, which I pushed pretty much to the limit, I think the end result is pretty good. And yes, I could have spent more time making more decisions, but I kind of look at this as the 80-20 rule. Not that you want something that's 80%, you want to make it as good as it can be, but for something that I wanted to complete within the month of February, which this track was, I wanted to make sure that I could actually get it out and it was something that I could look back on and go, yep, that's a good track, that's the best that I could do with what I was doing at the time. So what I'm going to do now is I'll play you the video that I've put together, which is the track. Thank you for watching this and for your interest, and I hope you learned a few tips and tricks that you can use in some of your future projects. And if you've got comments, questions and suggestions, as always, leave them down below. Now here is my new single called The Tree.
On a tree that you won't see. That's what they always said to me, and it never meant as much before as it means now. Waiting for you. So I try to do it right. Now you're somewhere out of sight, and I'm feeling like I'm kinda nervous, wondering when you'll come back to me. And I'll wait for you by the tree in the school, by the tree in the school. And you count on me to be there for you, to be there for you. Look around and all I see is others looking back at me, and I know they're feeling just the same as I feel now, waiting for you. Have you had a happy day? Did you find a friend to play? Are your hopes and dreams all coming true? And do you feel the same way too? Yeah, I'll wait for you by the tree in the school, the tree in the school. And you count on me to be there for you, there for you. Yes, I'll wait for you by the tree in the school, the tree in the school. And you count on me to be there for you, there for you. Yes, I'll wait for you by the tree.